Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first official lecture of History of Clothing and Fashion. We're going to go through some of the ideas behind what makes up clothing and how clothing is reflective of ourselves and of the society we live in. So let's start off with some definitions. Clothing is fiber or textiles worn on the body. It can also be considered a distinct style of a people, a class, a locality, or a period. Um, the one that is the trickiest definition is that clothing is the focus for the rules of a society. So if a society deems that a woman's body is shameful, then you're going to see women being forced to cover up more. If you are in a society that deems that everybody is a sports fan, everybody's going to be wearing sport branded clothing. So it's the rules of a society, sometimes spoken, laws written into law, and sometimes unspoken. So the force of peer pressure or the force of societal approbation. Um, so we can see in the images below here that um, we have the clothing of a group of people. The Sami, it's a Sami family from Scandinavia, and they're wearing the clothing of their familial group of their tribe, quote unquote. The clothing over here is indicative of 1960s and 70s clothing. You'll notice that it shows off a lot of skin, it's showing off a lot of leg, it's brightly colored, it is almost uh, non sexual in its shape. It's not showing off a lot more than unclad arms and legs, which was the style of the time. Anything that alters or covers the human body can be considered dress. So this is clothing. Hair is considered dress, footwear, underwear, and support clothing. Jewelry, body modifications is considered dress. Tattooing, scarification, piercing, or medical. Any of this stuff can be considered dress. Um, Clothing is a part of all human societies or cultures. It can be as simple as a sarong wrap, as we see over here on the right, and as complex as highly formalized, significant clothing that it has the weight of societal expectations behind it. And, we have something like the royal clothing here. So this is Queen Elizabeth being crowned queen. You'll notice that she is holding things, she's carrying things, she has earrings in, she has makeup on, she has specific garb, she has a specific background. All of this is a sort of pinnacle of um, English royalty. And so this is highly significant, highly symbolic clothing. And we have that as well. We have significant clothing that we are a party to. Maybe not as formal as the Queen or the Pope or religious figures or um, graduation, but we still have formal clothing that we need to be aware of. So the question becomes, so we know what clothing is. Um, the question then becomes, so why do we wear clothing? Do we have to wear clothing? Um, Homo sapiens have been around for about 200,000 years, but we've only been wearing clothing for about 170,000 years. Um, is interesting. So, how do you think anthropologists know when we started wearing clothing? And it's kind of fascinating how they figured that out. It wasn't necessarily a change in us, although um, our feet changed once we started to wear shoes. So we know when Homo sapiens started to wear shoes because our feet changed. The reason we know when humans started to wear clothes is the genetic difference in lice. So pre-clothing, human beings were pretty hairy. So we had body lice, we had hair lice. Once we started wearing clothing, the lice adapted so that it was able to live in the clothing itself rather than on our body. We still had body lice. We still have body lice today. But the lice genetically changed so that it was able to survive on clothing, on a clothed person. So some of the functions of dress. Now we can close down the functions. We can narrow down function to two different types. So we have practical clothing and we have expressive clothing. Um, we often don't wear clothing that is practical, other than for modesty purposes, but we always wear clothing that is expressive. It is the difference between something like, in a hockey goalie, their helmets are practical. They are there to protect them from hockey pucks. Every goalie can get away with just wearing a plain CCM or TTM. I don't know. I have no idea. Black one, a white one, a black one, a green one. They could wear just a plain one. But there is this highly sophisticated, expressive art form of hockey goalie masks. As we see here, this is Eddie Lack from I think he's still with the Hurricanes, but he has a Swedish chef painted on his mask. Um, so we see this highly expressive, unnecessary decoration of a very functional piece of clothing. And we see that in a lot of different places. So another great example of this practical versus expressive is in scrubs. So people can just wear scrubs. For those of you who have never worn scrubs, they're uncomfortable. They're made out of cotton. They're kind of one size fits most. They're generally built for men. And then eventually women's tailoring came into it, but sort of like surgical scrubs are sacks. They're basically bags of clothing. Um, so these are very practical pieces of clothing. They're made out of cotton so that you can boil them at a very high temperature to get rid of MRSA and staph infection, any bacteria or um, critters that are living in it, so that people don't get sick around it. There, I had a student once that told me that there are colors that different groups, different medicos wear different colors. I also just read an article that the reason surgeons wear green scrubs, that people wear green scrubs in surgery, is because of eye fatigue. So if we stare at something, if our eyes stare at something red for a very, very long time, it becomes difficult to distinguish variations in red, because the way our cones in the back of our eyes, whenever we see a color, our cones fire that color to give that signal to the brain that say, hey, we're perceiving this color. So if you're staring at something that's red for a very, very long time, our eye becomes fatigued. So the reason they wear green is because green is opposite of red on the color wheel, that you can look at green and it relaxes that. It allows that part of your cone in your eye to reset itself so that you can then see the variations in redness in different parts of the body when you're doing surgery. I read that like a day ago and it was fascinating. So back to practical versus express. So that's really super duper practical. Now, we see here in this that this is a set of practical clothing. It has pockets, it has labels, it's made out of cotton, really comfy shoes. But if you look down here, that whenever you blend practical and expressive, you get things like decorated scrubs. Do they need to be decorated? Absolutely not. Does it make the wearer and the viewer feel better? Sure, absolutely. That if you're going to go, if you're a male nurse and you're going into like this gentleman, or you're a nurse or a doctor, and you're going into a pediatric ward, I mean, if the kid sees that you're wearing this is superhero scrubs here. You're wearing superhero scrubs, the kid likes superheroes as well. That's a human connection. And that's kind of what decoration, that's what expressive clothing does for us. It allows human connections, which is kind of the point of being human, is to make connections. Um, all clothing is expressive. All clothing is expressive. Not all clothing is practical. We can get away with wearing unpractical clothing. There is never just one reason for behind a piece of clothing. We can't help but decorate. You know, it's part of who we are as people. It's part of how we, as we're going to see in a second, how we sort of express our inner life is through decorating our clothing. It's alliance with a group. It's making sure people know who we are. And we see in these pictures that, I mean, this is not practical. This gentleman here, not practical at all. Sock garters and um, short overalls, not that practical. But it's expressive. So what we're seeing here in these three images are people who have um, have very much leaned into the expressive part of their clothing. So I was a graduate student at West Virginia University, and it was February, I think. And it was Saturday morning. I was heading to the library. This is practical versus expressive, and it gets pretty cold. It's not as cold as here, but it gets pretty cold in Morgantown. And there was this woman who was walking to the library, and she was wearing Uggs. She was warm in her feet, and she was wearing a fleecy jacket, but she was also wearing short shorts. She was wearing shorts in like teen-degree weather. So what was happening there? And again, this the point of this class, we don't make judgments, we don't make value judgments about people's choices because people's choices are their own. But she was trumping expressiveness of looking a certain way over personal comfort. Often practical is subsumed by expressiveness. And so there's three different types. There are a few cultures in history where people wore little to no clothing. And it is not dependent on climate often, that human beings are amazingly adaptive to climate. That there was a group in I think the Andes Mountains that it was a cold climate, but they wore very little. Um, there are very warm climates where people wear a lot of clothing. We're really adaptive at climate. But there are no cultures without some form of decoration. Even cultures that don't necessarily wear a lot of clothing, they decorate themselves with jewelry, with paint, with scarification, with tattoos, with other elements that have the same societal function um, as sort of normalized clothing styles. Clothing constructs the social identity. Our clothing is there to show society who we are and how we fit or not fit. We can see that here. So one of the things is the uniform, the communist uniform of China. You'll notice, I think this was for the Beijing Olympics. This was one of the presentations for the Beijing Olympics. But you'll notice that they're all dressed alike and they all look alike. This is the societal function of this uniform, is to have this sort of ideal communistic uniformity that we're all the same. Again, the social identity, a personal identity, is part of this social identity. So some of the practical aspects of dress, we use dress for protection, information, and usefulness. Um, so when you have clothing, there's certain things that must happen. That clothing must be able to, the wearer must be able to move. Again, this is on a sliding scale. If you've ever worn like a wedding dress, eh, big hoop skirt wedding dress, not being able to move too much, or a corset, not being able to move too much. Um, you must be able to carry the weight of the garment, again, for a given quantity of that, and perform certain duties while wearing the clothing. You must be able to eat. You must be able to breathe. You must be able to sit down. You must be able to go to the bathroom. The inherent qualities of the materials used to make the garment's effects, its use in a practical way. So if you have a piece of clothing that is really, really stiff, it's going to make you not be able to bend. If you're wearing a corset that constricts your torso, you're not going to be, it's going to be harder to do certain actions. Um, Dyeability, warmth, longevity, what material is available, all of these affect how we wear clothing. Clothing enhances our survivability. So the first one is protection, and um, hence, humans are an extension of the body's protective resources. Clothing protects ourselves. So, for example, it's not that cold out, but in a couple of weeks, probably when we all get back from J term break, once January 27th hits, it's probably going to be negative 100,000 in Green Bay. Stupid Green Bay. Um, so we wear clothing to protect us from the cold, scarves and hats and boots, and we wear clothing that allows us to walk on ice. We wear clothing that allows us to walk on stones. We wear things to protect us from the climate. Also, the other way, as we see in this gentleman here, we wear things like sunscreen, sun hats, um, different types of clothing to protect us from the UV rays. All of that is super duper important. We also want to protect ourselves from critters, and nature. And this is shoes, netting. We'll put spray on ourselves, specialty clothing. So if you're a beekeeper, you're going to have specialty clothing to protect you from bees. Um, if you are in a place with mosquitoes, you're going to burn citronella. You're going to put on deep woods off. You're going to protect yourself from mosquitoes because mosquitoes are terrible. Um, Other things that we protect ourselves from is can be from dangerous and hazardous conditions. So this can either be occupational or recreational. So occupational is personal protection equipment. So dust masks, hard hats, goggles, earplugs, neoprene gloves, non-slip shoes, a cup maybe that protect yourself from harm, and certain clothing like that. We see an extreme one here, which is a fireman's outfit. It is specifically suited to protect this fire personnel from high temperatures, from noxious air, from whatever. We see this in the recreational here as well. Um, Often, in extreme circumstances, there are environments where we cannot survive without protective clothing. Some of it is in a fire or in deep water, but there is one place where we cannot survive without protective clothing, and it is outer space. If we did not have this protective clothing, we would die fairly quickly because we are not Matt Damon in The Martian. So this protective equipment is life-saving equipment. Um, but is it necessary in day-to-day wear? Absolutely not. Um, we wear clothing to protect our soft bits. Um, they said that this is the kotika or a penis gourd worn by native groups in New Guinea. They're used to signify social or tribal groupings and for protection. So even it's something that is protecting the soft dangly bits of a male is still decorated, still has decoration to it. Um, they wrote something about that the size of the gourd does not represent the size of the penis. It is merely about what social group you belong to or tribal grouping you belong to. So we need to as much or as little protection as we feel we need. Um, we still need some protection. We also want to protect ourselves from hostile spirits, from bad luck, from the unseen world. Unfertility, protect yourselves from unfertility. So things like crosses, the hamsa, or this is a Buddhist, the Thai tradition of the sak yank, yankt, which is they tattoo a religious inscription on the body to protect the bearer from evil. So this is protecting ourselves from things we can't see or think about, or we can't conceive of or believe that we can't see. Another thing we use clothing for is for information. Another practical use of clothing is for information. Um, so it could be occupational or craft specific clothes, mostly uniforms. So we see Target people wearing uniform. I'm sure every one of you has been at a Target or a Walmart or something, and it just happened to be wearing the red shirt and got stopped by somebody asking for help. So they want that. They want these unconscious clues so that they can help people, that they'll seem friendly. We also see uniforms are a great indicator of information. Um, Other than being a uniform jacket for a branch of the armed services, I couldn't tell you what any of that stuff means. Um, but we'll talk about that in a second. The other one is usefulness. The other practical use is usefulness. These are extensions of the bodies that make our lives easier, better, more useful, um, maybe not survivable, but comfortable. So things like eyeglasses or watches, purses, and even into prosthetics can be seen as useful clothing. Um, okay, so that is practical. We have a good handle on that. So the other side of this is the expressive. The expressive or narrative clothing. This is clothing that tells a story. And this is universal. All of our clothing tells a story. Even something as simple as a nun's garb still tells that story. So, clothing, you can see clothing as an essential extension of the self. We buy, we wear, we dispose of, we trade out, we choose clothing because it represents who we are as a people. Even whenever we think, oh, I just put on jeans and a t-shirt, it has nothing, whatever, there's still a choice there. There's still an extension of the self going on. It is a reflection of this idea of persona. So we see that here. So think about this. All right. So what is the college student uniform? What is the grouping of clothing that most college students wear? Um, it's usually a t-shirt and jeans, a hoodie, leggings, something really dressed down. It is absolutely casual wear, because that is the excuse me, that's the persona. Um, we could have personas like we see here is sort of youth culture there, um, very laid back, casual persona. We can have personas like I am a Green Bay Packers fan. That is a persona, and our personas change. As our personas change, and our personas change a lot, our clothing changes with it. Um, Clothing is an indicator of self in context. Our clothing choices and our bodies, by extension, are really laden with moral, social, uh, cultural, and aesthetic significance. Clothing choices are never made arbitrarily, as we can see here in these two images. These are people in context. So the woman on this side, she's at Burning Man. So that is a context for that clothing. This woman here, we can probably guess what's going on with her. That her context is she's going to work, she's going to court, she's going somewhere where formal garb uh, is more necessary. Um, could this person here in these clothing fit in where this person is? maybe, maybe not. It all depends on the context. Some of the functions of narrative dress is a reflection of persona. It is a reflection of occasional or symbolic clothing. It arouses emotions. It allows for membership and identification with the group. It also allows for inclusion or exclusion, the same thing with membership, or conformity and rebellion. Dress is the art of self expression. Clothing and decorating the body for social presentation is a basic form of self representation. For those of you who have children or younger siblings, it's always a treat whenever they start to dress themselves. That their parents, I mean, their clothing is being provided by their parents. And this is up until, into their teens that their clothing is generally maybe tween, maybe 10, that the parents are selecting clothing for the children. Um, but whenever they start to, no, I can do it, I'll dress myself, we're starting to see this sort of discovering of identity. So of course you get, I'm going to wear my yellow rubber boots with a sundress and a big floppy hat and uh, and my Princess Elsa wig. So you get these weird ass conglomerations of stuff, but it's trying out persona. We still do that. I mean, we all have elements of trying out personas, of trying to be different people. And through that, we wear different clothing. Think of how many times in your life that you've dressed up, and somebody has gone, oh my God, what's going on? Do you have court? Are you sick? Are you going to a meeting? What are you dressed up for? We in theater often, if I were to wear a skirt, people were like, what's going on? You look really nice. Well, I look nice all the time. Thank you. But you look different. So what's the new persona? What's the occasion? Um, Clothing and decorating the body for social presentation is a basic form of self representation. I am representing myself in a different way. Cultural mores, so the rules of a society, and the counter of these play heavily in our clothing decisions. Think back to high school. For those of you who went to kind of traditional American high schools, think back to those groups that if somebody wasn't dressed the same as everybody else, what happened to them? If it was Spirit Day and somebody didn't wear the right clothing, what happened to them? Um, Conformity plays really heavily into our clothing decisions. The need to conform, um, because clothing, because dress is a form of collective behavior. We dress a certain way because we are part of a certain group. Um, and there's a coercive element to it. Like I was saying earlier, that so say I came in and I was wearing a muumuu, a big piece of clothing. For those of you who know me, not far from it, um, but this enormous, heavily colored piece of clothing, and I wore it into class one day. Or if I wore a suit, I wore a men's suit. Or if I wore booty shorts and a tank top. I mean, each one of those people would comment on, and we generally don't want comments. People usually don't want to stick out that much. So if people are commenting, if people are saying something, if people are, oh, I really like that outfit, it looks interesting on you. Those are little coercive elements. It's not forcing. We're never forced. We're not forced to wear certain things. There are really no laws other than decency laws um, that force us to wear something. But there is a coercion to it. There's peer pressure that sort of forces us to wear certain things in a certain way. Um, it's though we assume that we are dressing the way we really want to, but are we? So think about that. Think about next time you get dressed to go out to Baba Louie's or the Q&A or something. Think about what you're wearing and why you're wearing it. That's always the question is why. Why do we wear certain clothing? Um, so we see over here, and for those of you in business, I'm sure you've had a talking to about this, sort of what a professional dress code is. Generally, our dress codes are about neatness and kemptness. You need to not smell like dog poo. You need to be well groomed, clean shaven. Um, no visible tattoos or piercing is often business wear, formal, more formal business wear. A tie, having your clothes ironed or pressed and cleaned. Um, Wearing nice shoes. Shoes are always the thing that gets you. So for women, again, being groomed, not wearing too much makeup, um, not showing off cleavage, keeping things simple and not too provocative or showing off. I guess it's the thing that, having lived in the Midwest for 10 years now, that might be the thing is don't show off too much. Um, you can monkey around with this. What if a businessman wore makeup? What if he wore eyeliner or lipstick? What if a businesswoman wore no lipstick or eyeliner, wore no makeup? Um, those are like people would ask about that, or people would, hey, what's going on with you? Why are you not conforming? Um, Self adornment has a life enhancing quality. We love dressing. We love showing off. We love showing our humanness through the stuff we wear. We love showing our allegiances. It announces to the world who we are and who we perceive ourselves to be. Um, the other thing about this sort of clothing, this narrative clothing, is that it is a function of our persona, and we're mercurial. Something like I don't feel good today. I'm going to dress a certain way because I don't feel good today. I'm going to wear my woobies, my warm clothes, because I don't feel good today. I've got a little bit of the chills. I'm running a bit of a fever. I just feel blechy. So I'm going to wear something that's going to make me feel better. Our clothing changes with this mercurial persona. So during the day, if I have a meeting with my boss, I might dress up a little bit better. If I'm in the scene shop painting, I'm going to wear work clothes. When I go home and have dinner, I'm going to wear my comfiest clothes. So my clothing changes as I become different people. This leads us to clothing that helps us define our persona, it changes our persona. This is special occasion clothing, um, clothing that fits our occasions, clothing that fits our moods. This is generally clothing with large cultural significance, and they're linked to our societal rituals. And these bits of clothing help tell the story of a society, help tell the story, the narrative of who we are, not just as an individual, but who we are as a people. We sort of link into it. And sometimes it's a put on job. So, for example, proms, like winter formals and proms, they're not okay. Nobody hit me. Nobody come to my office and water balloon me. They're not necessary. Having a $6,000 dress for your prom is not necessary. A $600 dress for your prom or a $600 suit for your prom is not necessary. It's fun, hell yeah. But we have societal expectations. Um, and so things like proms and weddings, debutante balls, getting dressed up for your coming out, being a deb, being out in society. So church clothes, wearing something different for church, or your Easter clothes, or your Christmas clothes. I remember whenever I was younger, we were pretty poor growing up. There's 4 kids and my parents. We were pretty poor growing up. But for Easter, there was a couple times a year that we would get new clothes. One of it was Easter for Easter Mass. One of it was school, the first day of school. We would get a whole new set of clothes. And maybe for Christmas, mom would get us some socks and underwear sort of thing, and jeans. like that. But we didn't get a lot of new clothes, but those were occasional clothing. We had brand new clothes for school. Um, and we also have spectator clothing, so for sports and for concerts. So each of these are part of sort of what we as a society have deemed important. So prom is important, a wedding is important, a funeral is important. So we have specialized clothes that tell that importance, that speak to that importance. So I know you all, hopefully, you all went through convocation at the beginning when you were freshmen, uh, brand new to St. Norbert College, and we all the faculty wore our robes and we applauded for you with our hats and stuff. That's part of. I've never been to a school that does that. It's a particular St. Norbert College thing. Graduations, I've been to a bunch. And there's specialized clothes for that because it is a special occasion. And usually you see these linchpins, these pokes of societally chosen events are generally built around coming of age. Of like so graduation from high school to college, graduation from college to the workforce, weddings. So it's these big shifts of persona that now I am a wife and a mother. Now I am a dad. Now I am a college graduate. Now I am doctor. Now I am, all these many, many things. And there's clothing to match. So interesting. Anthropologists, again, back to occasional or symbolic clothing, anthropologists index symbolic dress under four principal categories. So there's totemic, trophyism, hierarchic, and emblematic. So totemic is there because it describes man's early impulse to imitate, as closely as possible, the animal, bird, or plant he most wanted to influence. So we see the image here. This is a shaman. And this is a sympathetic magic. So this is a shaman who is dressed as an animal that the hunters of the group, the hunters of the tribe, are going to go out and find and kill. So the night before the hunt, they pretend. So the shaman is pretending to be this animal. It works on the other side as well, and this is the birth of dance and theater. That after the hunters have successfully brought back the food for the group, they'll recreate it. They'll tell the story of this hunt. This is sympathetic magic because we're acting in small what we want big to happen. We see this totemic kind of clothing in often in sports clothing, especially if you take a look at this. So this is University of Miami Hurricanes. But if you take a look at groups like the Cleveland Browns, the Dog Pound, that they want their players to be really fierce, so they're going to dress up as animals, and we're going to pretend to be fierce so that our players are fierce. It's all totemic. The next one is trophyism. And this is advertising excellence in dress. So superiority of character indeed. I am going to show you how successful I am with all of my goods so that you treat me better. Things like class rings. I'm showing my class ring off so that you know that I graduated from West Virginia University. So this is my class ring. Oh, um, so it's this sort of I have excellence in my clothing. Um, we see this. We see this in sort of this image down here that this is a really successful hunter because he's wearing skins and animal feathers, and he is carrying his winnings, his trophies with him. We see this also with ritual tattooing, scarification, and body paint. That we see this sort of trophyism. This is what I have earned. The more animal skins, antlers, and teeth you decorate yourself with, the more you seem stronger, blessed, more courageous, more skilled a hunter. Um, so we're showing off. We see this a lot in tattooing, especially sort of very ritualized, symbolic tattooing. So this is a tattoo from the right arm of a Scythian chief, made about 2,500 years ago. And this is a Russian prison tattoo, about 2000. And in both instances, there is a symbolic language that tells of their prowess, that tells of what what they have done with their lives. And kind of like military clothing, the trophies that military people wear on their chest, the ribbons and medals, it's kind of the same thing. That being not initiated into this language, we don't know what it means, but we know it's glorious. But somebody who knows, who has been in this culture, knows exactly what this person here has done to earn all of these tattoos because they are earned. We see this also. So this is a photograph from Vietnam. This is collecting war trophies. Medals and medals and ribbons. They'll collect skulls. So this guy has found a skull and put it on his tent. Um, Skin, fingers, bits of vanquished foe is trophyism. One of my favorite things in college football is the sticker system, which I find amazing. That you do good, you get a sticker. We should all be so. I should go to a faculty meeting and do good and not fall asleep and get a sticker. But it's trophyism. Look how many stickers I earn for being excellent at my job. The next one is hierarchic. So this is the arena of exclusivity and rank. This is when there are rules about who can wear what when. Um, Back in the day, and we're going to talk about this when we get to Elizabethan, when we get to the Renaissance, there were these things called sumptuary laws, which um, which the nobility put into effect so that they were the only ones who could wear certain colors or certain furs or certain shapes. And it was to make this sort of hierarchical distinction between them, the nobility, the aristocracy, the royalty, and all the rest of us plebes, you know. They were chased by the upwardly mobile bourgeoisie. And so they wanted to keep the bourgeoisie in their place so that they were distinctive. And they had rules and laws in place to make that happen. The laws did not last very long. Um, Military dress and religious garb are very much part of this hierarchic clothing. So, as we see here, this is a Greek Orthodox, and each piece of clothing kind of tells the story of who they are. Um, who is the most important person in the person of highest rank in this picture? Wonder who that is. Maybe this dude in the middle with all the gold clothes on. The same thing for it in of the military. So we know who they are by what stripes they're wearing, or we know what rank they are by what stripes they're wearing. The last one is the emblematic. Now, this is symbolic clothing that conveys a deeper cultural or societal understanding. For example, at graduation, the president of St. Norbert College has a medallion around his neck. That is an emblem of his position at St. Norbert. It's this big piece of bling. They call it the president's bling, which is dirty now that I say it out loud. Um, so this could be a piece of clothing, jewelry, like a St. Norbert College shirt is emblematic. It conveys a deeper cultural or societal understanding. It's even like colors have even creeped into our clothing. So emblematic colors have creeped into our language. So things like a blue collar worker, we know what a blue collar worker is. It's somebody who used to wear blue clothes, but it's a mechanic. It is a person who works with his hands. It's someone who is versed in trades, in skills, not necessarily um, in other forms of business. White collar is always sort of their managers because they can afford to have their clothes be white because they don't get dirty. White hats, so the good guys, black hats, the bad guys from old westerns. Blue stockings are women who went to learn. Brown shirt. The importance of emblematic clothing can be seen when governments try to outlaw traditional native clothing. So in that's the when a government tries to destroy another's culture, one of the first things they attack is language. One of the second thing they attack is emblematic clothing. Um, so when England took over Scotland, one of the first things they did was says nobody can wear kilts anymore. Kilt is verboten. Um, we see that when England um, took over India. You can't wear your traditional clothing. You have to wear Western style clothing. And it's a way to sort of demoralize, to remove the culture from a person, from the group that they identify with. All uniforms can be considered symbols in an emblematic sense because they represent something bigger than themselves. So, for example, these are the beefeaters. Colloquially, they're called beefeaters, but they're called yeomen of the guard. They represent um, they represent sort of England. So when they're wearing all this stuff, they're England. This is the Pontifical Swiss Guard. And whenever we get to medieval time or Renaissance, we're going to talk about this outfit. Um, but they're wearing traditional old school clothing because they are representative of a long history. It's an emblem. They are a symbol more than themselves. We see that in uniforms here, in things like kimono is emblematic of Japan. Um, Barack Obama's Shepard Fairey's Barack Obama portrait was emblematic of sort of the big cultural political shift that happened whenever Obama was running for the first time for president. And even uniforms, again, these sort of uniforms are emblematic of the team, the school, the culture that they represent. So the next step of narrative clothing, another thing that narrative clothing does, is arouse emotions. Some of these emotions are kind of neutral. We can arouse the emotions of anger if we see somebody who is wearing something we don't agree with. Um, we can arouse the emotions of happiness if we see somebody wearing something we do like. These sort of neutral, these sort of normal emotional responses to things. Often we're sort of um, blasé about what other people wear. Um, Emotionally, intellectually, we'll sometimes feel you probably shouldn't be wearing that, but emotionally, we're an even keel. But often there are things that kind of just set us off. One of the ways that we can be set off is cause a sexual attraction or lust. This happens a lot. We often dress to attract our preferred gender of partner. um, some of this is because of the biological impetus to propagate the species. We must have children, so often we dress provocatively to feed that need for um, biological urges to ease that biological urge. Often this is seen is in the accentuation of sexual areas, primary or secondary sexual organs. Now this has changed over the centuries. We'll see that especially when we get into the 19th century, that what was taboo became okay, and what was okay became taboo, especially in women's garb. So showing off an ankle was, oh no. In the next decade, showing off shoulders were, oh no, but ankles were okay. So we kind of drift around in what is permissible, what is societally permissible. You can see um, in these three images that we are showing off um, sort of attractive areas. Again, this is not universal. What we find attractive is not necessarily what another person might find attractive, but showing off um, masculine or feminine um, sort of attributes is sometimes seen as highly sexually attractive, beautiful. We also arouse the opposite of trying to attract sexual attention is trying to deflect sexual attention, and this is linked into modesty. A lot of this is linked into um, societal or religious ideas of modesty. So covering the body or dressing in ways that do not attract sexual attention, and these conceal. And we can see that that something like the modesty swimming outfits are becoming more and more popular, especially with Muslim women that they can dress. But this idea of modesty in women's dress has been around for a very, very long time. That we must cover our women so that they do not inspire uh, inspire sexual emotions. Um, it could also, but more modern, now that women have choice, that often when women cover themselves, it's because of their relationship with their significant other, their relationship with God, their relationship with their religion. That's why they're making these choices. Um, Often, modesty is not necessarily connected with nudity. Taboo areas change with the culture and times. Another thing that we arouse is admiration or envy. Much of capitalism is American capitalism is built on this. We look up to others and we want to be looked up to. This is a validation that we are living worthy lives if people dress like us or act like us, or we dress and act like people we admire. We align ourselves with their persona whenever we dress a certain way. And this has been, I mean, media kind of drives that. In politics, drives it less, but more recently, the "Make American Great Again" hat um, is aligning yourself with a political figure for good or for ill. We see here something like the Kentucky Derby is a great example of dressing for admiration or envy. Wearing labeled clothes, wearing branded clothes, is engenders admiration or envy. Carrying a Louis Vuitton bag, um, Coco Chanel, or one of these highly visible labels, Dolce and Gabbana, shows off that you have made it, that you are enviable. Um, Often, so from politics, most of the time from media, we see these come out. So back in the 90s when Friends started, we had the Rachel haircut. The second that woman showed up with that haircut, so many people were getting it because they wanted to identify with the character of Rachel. They wanted to identify with this fun group of friends in the city. And so one way you do that is to get their haircut. We see that in the Rolling Stones down here that um, we're looking at sort of this 50, we'll talk about this when we get there, but this sort of 50s straight lace clothing versus this new style, the mod. It's called mod style of clothing with longer haircuts and boots with little heels on it, tucka boots. That and sort of skinny suits, that this particular brand of clothing allowed you to identify with a larger group, with a mod group. And it's still happening today, this sort of aligning ourselves with groups that we admire. So something like some group like Vampire Weekend, the musical group Vampire Weekend, or Mumford and Sons. That when Vampire Weekend dropped their latest album, you bet the Hyannisport, New England look kind of rose a little in estimation. That it started to appear in stores a little bit more, and that's kind of like skinny jeans and polos and was a puffy vest. Oh my God, that dude loves his puffy vest. Versus Mumford and Sons, which is kind of drab colors, vest, a little less flashy than Vampire Weekend. Another great example of this is I was a kid when Indiana Jones came out. Everybody went and bought a leather coat and a fedora. My sister owned a leather coat and fedora because of Indiana Jones. So we wanted that sort of adventurer, intellectual adventure lifestyle. We were going to wear the clothes of it because we admired it. Nobody looks good except for Harrison Ford in that outfit. But we wanted that because we wanted to be that. We were envious of that. Another emotion that is aroused by clothing is the idea of fear. And this is the fear of the other, the fear of the outsider, the fear of not us, people that don't look like us. We have a snap judgment of being scared of, especially whenever they use it to their own effect. Often this is dressed as worn off clothing, stay the fuck away from me clothing. Excuse my language. And and a lot of this is also media based that the media teaches us that we're supposed to be afraid of these groups. You have nothing to fear from a lot of these, some of these groups. Okay, you have nothing to fear from these groups sometimes. So groups like the Hells Angels or biker outlaw look, that their look is unkempt. And that's often where it lands, is that they're unkempt, they're hairy, they are not clean, and they wear clothing that is not like other people's clothing. So biker leathers, dirty jeans, wife beater tank tops, and that is so outside of what in the at the time period in the 60s, whenever these biker groups became very popular, it was outside of what people were used to, so they were scared of them. We see things like face tattoos and heavily tattooed people in gangs, or down here even um, I think the scariest of all, the Ku Klux Klan, sort of this kind of worn off clothing that inspires fear. Um, this all of this stuff leads to clothing that is part of membership and identification. We're herd creatures. We want to be with groups. We want to belong. We like to be part of a group, and part of that is um, showing off that you're part of a group, that you have earned your leather jacket whenever you're a Hell's Angel, that you've earned those Greek letters that you wear so proudly. That this is I am a member of whatever Greek fraternity or sorority, so I'm going to wear those letters, and everybody else will know that I'm a member of that group too. This clothing signifies both identification with a group and individual instinctive distinctiveness. So we see something like the Black Panther Party, which was a kind of like a black rights movement of the 60s and 70s, and they had a uniform that they wore. It was leather coats, it was black slacks, black boots or black shoes, a black turtleneck, a black work shirt, and a beret. And it came from the war. So a lot of these outfits that we see coming up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s were based out of war clothing that they just transferred over to domestic wear. But you could align yourself with a group by wearing this outfit. Um, we see that in school uniforms, that you're a member of a school group. Often the rules for clothing for a specific group are only decipherable to initiates. So, for example, uh, if you're a member of a biker group, you might have a name, you might have a particular emblem, you might have a series of emblems that only you and your the members of your group can decipher. Um, and this is pretty common because there's an element of specialness. If you're one of few that can translate what people are seeing, then you're special. And it's not bad to want to be special. Um, but we'll often see that there is a commonality in clothing um, among disparate groups. So I've noticed this particular outfit, it is this sort of jeans or work pants rolled up at the cuff, suspenders, and a white shirt, and a kind of a shaved head or a cut, a tight, high and tight, like really um, short hair, is this particular look that echoes um, their father's work clothes. Um, so we know skinheads, right? These are neo-Nazi skinheads, and they wear white shirts and combat pants or jeans and work boots, and they shave their head and they have tattoos. Uh, these are 1970s British skinheads, and they're not necessarily part of like a, a fascist group like not neo Nazis are. They're fans of a particular brand of music. They're like punk fans. So they have this look that are echoing their father's outfit, which is white shirt, suspenders, jeans rolled up at the cuff, and work boots. We also see this down here as well for some motorcycle clubs. Before this is pre Hells Angels, but these people who race motorcycles, and this is 1950, white shirts, jeans rolled up in the cuffs, and work boots. So this sort of disparate groups wearing the same sort of outfit, and that how do you how do you choose between them? Which how do you understand who belongs to what? Well, maybe that's kind of the point. We also see things like the red hat ladies. There's this poem. It's like when I get old, I'm going to wear a red hat with purple feathers or a purple dress with a red hat. And so there's the red hat ladies. Boy, when I I used to work for a theater where red hat ladies would come to the matinee, and they would get tanked at the restaurant next door and come over. Red hat ladies know how to party. Nuns, we identify a group of women who have given up the earthly world and decided to devote themselves to God as nuns. We can identify nuns in a specific order. Um, so if you're the member of a sorority or fraternity, or something even as you align yourself with a group. So this is the famous whiteout at Happy Valley in Penn State. So they everybody has to wear white, and they all it's the whiteout. So you're identifying yourself with a group. And some of these are like the nuns religious, so the Hare Krishnas, or schoolgirls in wearing the hijab. Now, the other flash of this, the other side of this, is this idea of conformity or rebellion. A person's attire can indicate either conformity to the major paradigm, to the society's rules, or resistance to these rules that society has put together, and expectations for dress and behavior. So we all have a streak of counterculture to us, to anti culture to us. We've all had moments of defiance, and that's part of growing up. That's part of being a human being. Um, uh, but even rebellion, even these punks here have their own kind of peer pressure conformity. So if you were to go to a punk club and you would be dressed as a member of Vampire Weekend in kind of skinny jeans and a puffy vest, you might be peer pressured out of it. You might be pushed away. You might be made fun of. There might be a risk to not, there's always a risk to nonconformity. There is always an element of danger, maybe not danger, physical danger, but sort of emotional danger, societal danger by being a nonconformist. We should all try it out every once in a while. So we see some of these groups, um, like the Scene Street Pub Kids, um, heavily tattooed people, and I haven't found a good name. I'm going to keep calling them Guidos. This sort of um, spray tanned, blonde spray tan Blink 182 looking dudes. I think they're part of like the Scenester kids anyway. But all of this is conformity and rebellion. How do you conform and how do you rebel? Um, Clothes are like filling in a census blank. consider what clothing can be used to convey about ourselves. It conveys our sex or our gender, um, age, nationality, geographic area, religious affiliations, what we do for a living, social class status, economic status or wealth, marital status, sexual availability, rank, personal achievements, loyalties, group affiliations, family connections, or a state of mind. So gender is one of the most laden of all the dress codes. In the past, going counter to traditional clothing, gender roles in clothing was seen as transgressive. Today, we're working towards it being accepted. We got ways to go, but we're getting there. The manner in which clothing emphasizes or de-emphasizes the sex of the wearer can be very telling. So, how do we genderize clothing? How do we know? So, think again back to the sort of um, college uniform, jeans and a t-shirt. How do we, these are sort of gender neutral, agender clothing. How do we identify the gender of the person by the clothing they wear whenever they're wearing something that is agendered? Um, and it becomes into more specific. So, what distinguishes male and female clothing? What distinguishes hypermasculinity versus hyperfemininity? Often, what distinguishes male's clothing is color, is cut, is how it fits, is things like the material it's made out of. Although these are all getting smooshy. Often, the things that distinguish male clothing from female clothing is decoration. Women's clothing is generally more highly decorated than men's clothing. Men's clothing is usually plainer. Um, so femininity, brighter colors, pastel colors are usually women's clothing. But again, this is not a hard and fast rule. Like I said earlier, fortunately, we're moving towards a more gender neutral that we can all wear. We don't have to adhere to our gendered clothing. We're going to be spending a lot of time in this class talking about sort of the difference between gendered clothing, because it for most of human history, it kind of had the force of law that women and men could not dress like each other. It was forbidden. It was taboo. Um, until we hit the 1960s when things started to get a little more blendy. So we see in these women's clothing that there's a lot more to it versus the men's suit on this picture or the loot trading. Um, that there's a lot more to women's clothing. There's a lot more fullness, a lot more richness, a lot more visual and tactile sensation that it has a better touch to it. Um, so, what happens when we blend these? What happens when in the 80s that okay, imagine this. You're a heavy metal band and you want to piss off the squares. What do? Well, you transgress. You force the issue. You dress outside of the close tight gender norms. And we see that here. So this is Motley Crue and this is Twisted Sister. So you'll notice that what we're looking at is this sort of blending of masculine, traditional masculine and feminine clothing articles. So in masculine clothing, there's jeans, there's denim, there is uh, kind of ripped up clothing. There's studs. There's this kind of highly aggressive masculine clothing that is blended with highly aggressive feminine clothing. So D. Snyder is not just wearing makeup on this, he is wearing all of the makeup that he can. Um, that they're not just wearing like a little bit of blush, they're wearing all of it. That it is in your face. That is not just regular high heels, they're wearing high heel boots with studs on them. So this is that idea of taking both blending together and flipping the middle finger at society that it is transgressive. Um, both these groups came out in the 80s, and the 80s were pretty damn square. Could you imagine just what happened whenever they hit the scene and what dad was saying about my dad liked them. My dad liked them. Um, but that they were, what the hell is going on? The country's going down the toilet. But anytime there's anything that is outside of the norm, the country's going down the toilet. We also see this, not that it's transgressive, but this sort of blending of gender that sort of the trans community um, or the cross-dressing community even, that they take on attributes of the opposite sex um, and wear them with pride, which absolutely. But again, it is going outside of the gender norm to either feel better in your skin, um, to put on a show, to any number of reasons, to go outside of the gender norm. Um, and it should be celebrated, dang it. Um, that also, the other side of it is that you could use that sort of transgressiveness as a weapon. So we see here, how do you keep women in their place? Well, you tell them that they're not going to be attractive, and at this time period, so this is like the 1900s, 1910s, up to 1919, um, that they're unnatural, that they don't fit in, that they're ugly, that they're hideous, that they're unlovable if they want to vote. So that's what we're seeing here. So this is the modern Eve. So what's going to happen if women get the right to vote? Well, men will be wearing dresses and take care of babies, and women will hit them with shoes, I guess, and wear the pants in the family. Nobody loves me. I guess I'll be a suffragette. Suffragettes who've never been kissed. So it's that one of the weapons that they can use is that, well, you're not a real woman. If you want the vote, you're not a real woman. Men do this as well. This has happened to men. A lot of our advertisements, so Old Spice, jeans, uh, it's obliquely implied that if you don't wear a certain thing, you're not a real man, which is, come on. So that's, it's always this sort of, what is the ideal and how do we break away from it? Um, and how does society try to force us back into that mold, because everybody has to have a place. We also see androgyny, this sort of neither here nor there, um, in Patti Smith, in David Bowie, that they have blended both male and female aspects. Um, Men wearing kilts. Seinfeld. Sometimes it's a joke. Sometimes they'll use it as comedy. If you ever watch Monty Python, often some of the funniest skits are the one where the men dress up as women. The puffy shirt episode of Seinfeld. Um, so women in suits, men's suits, women playing football. So all of this is sort of, how have these gender rules changed? How have these this gender clothing have changed over the years, over the ages? Um, and then you see, this is Coco Chanel in her pants. Unheard of for women to wear pants back then, and proudly. And men in skirts. I think there was a movement in New York City about women and supporting women, so men wore skirts. Um, Again, sort of this idea of androgyny. How do you tell? And is it necessary to be able to tell who's a male and who's a female? No, I don't think so. So age and health. Young people and healthy people tend to reveal their figures because they're usually in better shape, while older people or the infirm tend to cover themselves up. In any period, color, cut, and fit can suggest the age of the wearer, and maybe may give clues to how he or she feels about their age. If grandma feels young, she might wear clothing more suited to her granddaughter. Age appropriate clothing is swayed by body changes, physical demands, and societal pressures. Um, I, Often you'll hear um, if a mom is not wearing age appropriate clothing, their daughters, "Mom, why are you wearing? Stop wearing that. You don't look. That's too young for you." Um, uh, Obviously, this woman on the left feels great about herself, no matter what her age, because she is wearing a negligible bikini, a small bikini. She must feel awesome. She has that self assurance. The other image here, so you can kind of see age of how old people are by what they're wearing. You'll notice that the youngest, not the baby, but the youngest woman in the room is showing off her legs. The older women are wearing long sleeves or wearing long pants because they're covering up more and more and more. Often you'll see that clothing it becomes lighter as you get older. That older people are pushed into pastels and into flowery clothing because that's what society tells them they should like. So nationality, often we'll see clothing for nationality. Usually this is based on traditional or folk clothing or special occasion clothing. So people will wear the clothing of their people, of their tribe for special occasions. So for example, back home, I'm from Pennsylvania. They would have Highland Days, the Lancaster or Ligonier Highland Days. And it was a Scottish festival. So people would break out their Scottish kilts, and everybody wore a kilt and the sporran and all of that stuff because it was a special occasion. Even if you weren't Scottish, what the hell, wear a kilt. So we see the different nationalities represented in the clothing that these people wear. Now, this also can have the force of stereotypes, as we see here. How is nationality represented through the stereotypical national clothing? So, for example, jeans and sneakers, American clothing, cowboy hats, or American flag cowboy hats. For Germans, it's lederhosen and little Tyrolean hats. French is a striped shirt, a scarf, and a beret, and British is umbrellas and bowlers. So stereotype clothing again has that force of um, shorthand. It's a symbolic shorthand. We see geographic area, so climate. Uh, so the clothing in Tokyo, Japan, is way different than what New Yorkers wear. Um, so the climate affects that. If you think about what New Yorkers wear versus what people in Miami wear, environmental factors, regional mores. So what does society tell you? Could a bunch of people walk down the street in New York City wearing kimonos if they weren't Japanese? Probably not. They probably get some looks. Um, so what is society telling you that you have to wear or not wear? Um, so Wearing sneakers on the red carpet in 2009, I guess was when that picture was, or something like this. This is a group of politicians or lawyers. How can we tell where they are? So this is very Hollywood. A suit with, I think he's wearing Air Jordans. So where are these people located? So you can take a look at the clues, and the clue is in the footwear. Texas. This is a picture taken in Texas, so all the guys are wearing cowboy boots. Um, could people wear cowboy boots to graduation? Could we wear cowboy boots? Absolutely. Would we get some looks? Absolutely. In Texas, if we were at the University of Texas in Austin, if we all wore cowboy boots to graduation, nobody would blink an eye. Up here, people would blink an eye. We also wear clothing that shows our religious affiliation, and this is all clothing that shows. This is clothing that shows off who we are as people. So it's either a dictate of the religion, so you must wear X, Y, and Z, or part of personal expression, or both. Sometimes it's a blending of both. So things like the hijab or The Hare Krishnas again. I just like Hare Krishnas. Wearing kind of these sort of flowing robes or crosses around your neck. Or I saw somebody on TV the other day that they were wearing a rosary. I was watching Judge Judy. Somebody was wearing a rosary on Judge Judy. Like, okay, show off your religious affiliation. Again, clothing that shows off our occupation. Um, so, doctors and nurses, uh, fire personnel, baseball players, and blue collar workers with wonderful hats. One of the ways that we show off who we are as people is through showing off our social status or our class. Some of the ways humans use clothing to express social superiority is through these four. So conspicuous consumption, conspicuous leisure, conspicuous waste, or vicarious consumption. So conspicuous consumption, it's adorning ourselves with clothes that cost a great deal of money. Um, so this is conspicuous and changing your clothes often. I have a new dress every day. I have lots of stuff. I see this in, and when I built this PowerPoint a bunch of years ago, this was not a thing. But unboxing videos, like this idea of conspicuous consumption of buying, and so I was watching one of these for another project, and this woman was opening, she was a teenager, and she was opening just boxes of stuff. And she's like, or she went shopping and she was unloading her goods, her what she had bought. She pulled out these shirts and said, "Yeah, I bought these. I don't think I'm ever going to wear them. Oh, I bought these shoes. I'm never going to wear this." And it was this conspicuous consumption. She was able to purchase this stuff and show her social status through purchasing. Um, do we need to? No. Do we want to? Yeah, no judging here, but um, often I think we're seeing a turn lately, especially in the realm of fashion, that people are spending less. We're going to talk about that for the next in a couple lectures, though. Um, Conspicuous leisure. We dress in clothing that make it impossible to do practical work. We can hire somebody to do the work for us. So we see this in this 18th century. These are panniers, so there's basket work underneath here. I mean, she could barely sit down, let alone scrub floors. So we hire somebody to do the work for us. We cannot. It is not impossible, but I just got my nails done. I can't do dishes. I'll hire somebody to do dishes. Um, I have these new beautiful Air Jordans on. I'm not going to plow a field. I'll hire somebody to plow a field for me. So we see this sort of I can't because, um, and we're showing off how our social status because of that. Conspicuous waste. It's based on the theory that practical things are not beautiful, so we show our superiority by indulging in pastimes that have no useful purpose or are expensive to maintain. Weddings are a great example of this. Wedding is a okay, nobody come to my office and beat me up for this, but a wedding's a waste. It is one day that costs thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. A wedding dress is a waste. A $20,000 wedding dress is a waste. It's conspicuous waste. You're wearing something that you're going to wear once. You're going to box up. You're going to put away. Um, you know, the phones. Phones is an example of conspicuous waste. That the new iPhone X10 came out, and we put our old phones away and we buy a new one. We don't use that old one. We're going to waste it. We don't need a new one. I mean, I am a victim of this just as much as anybody else, that often if I I'm working on it, but often, like I have an iPad. I use an iPad for a ton of stuff. But there's a new one coming out, and I this one's just getting a little too slow. So I need to buy a new iPad soon. I don't. My iPad's fine. My iPad's fine. I don't need to buy a new one, but I really, really want one. And it's conspicuous waste because this iPad, I'll either hand it down to one of my siblings or it'll go in storage and I'll never use it again. So it's this idea of we're wasting. The other one is vicarious consumption. So it's expressing your superiority by ensuring those connected to you are presented to the world in the most costly way possible. Um, an entourage, the show Entourage, is giving gifts to your entourage, having a group of people that look a certain way or act a certain way around you shows off how awesome you are. And this is MC Hammer. We see this in, if you've ever watched Toddlers and Tiaras, don't because it's horrid. But we see this in, so this is Mommy Dearest. This is a movie called Mommy Dearest that often um, people will spend on their children, um, so that they're living vicariously through their children. And that is part of vicarious consumption. Class we often see in clothing: aristocracy, nobility, the nouveau riche, bourgeoisie or the middle class, the working class, and the poor. Our clothing often shows this off, again by kemptness, by cut, color, wealth, materials, all of this stuff, because the wealthy can afford nicer clothing than the poor. The poor often wear clothing that is falling apart or ripped up or dirty, because they can't afford um, to do stuff like that. I mean, this is old. This is kind of like old stereotypes stuff. But in the media, this is how they're represented. And speaking of media, so we see this is Downton Abbey. We see over on this side the wealthy people, and then we get down to the servants, and we can see a distinct difference in the clothing from like this 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 dude. I think he married somebody in here. That this is the wealthy people, so they're wearing colors and they're wearing really nice stuff. Once we get here, less colorful and more plain. That we often see that is the distinction for it. Um, it's something that we kind of wrestle with as a society, that the assumptions about what wealthy people versus poor people wear. We pride ourselves on saying that we're a classless society, but that's not true. We have class distinctions all over the place. And so we kind of ride stereotypes about how people dress in relation to their income. And sometimes it's used as a political weapon, um, to to enact um, harsher harshness on poor people, like to punish people who don't have money or the wherewithal. Um, so, like anything, you can't make assumptions on anything. We also see not only in we can also see in economic wealth and status and wealth. So materials, the difference between leisure and leisure, labor and leisure, disposable income, colors and style. And this is going to be something that we're going to talk about a lot. Throughout most of our history that we're going to talk about, a lot of what we look at, especially the Renaissance through the early 1900s, a lot of what we're going to look at is wealthy people, because those are the ones that had portraits painted, as we see here of this is Marie Antoinette. She got a portrait painted of her because she is a wealthy woman. So we understand a lot of clothing history through wealthy people. Unfortunately, when we hit the 1900s, we start to see photography and people focusing on normal folks. So we'll see a lot more of that as we move forward in history. Marital status, usually it's easy to interpret somebody's marital status or availability um, through through a really easy symbol, a pair of rings. Will tell you if somebody is married. It's not as easy to interpret someone's sexual availability. Many times, dressing sexy equals feeling attractive and is not an invitation for a come on. Um, Always ask for permission. Always ask. But we see that again. How do you show off that? Um, that you feel attractive. So often we're showing off legs, we're showing off cleavage for women. For men, uh, we'll show off chests or muscles. And sometimes we have shiny belt buckles right down in the groin area. Military rank, political and marriage, military rank, again, it is steeped in cultural information and not really easy to interpret. So we kind of see heraldry here, or in Britain, the ranks of um, judges and such, like what kind of fancy outfits do you get to wear? Personal achievement, my sister just graduated with her PhD and she got a very nice hat for graduation. So if you are a PhD, you get to wear a very nice hat. If you are just a mere MFA like I am, you get a not as nice hat. But I've decided I'm going to make my own. So who's going to tell me no? So the Lincoln Center honors getting this medallion for being excellent, and Greek letters. So that's a personal achievement. Again, it's based on cultural information. Loyalties, beliefs, group affiliation. So if you're a Steelers fan, you're upset right now because they're not in the playoffs, but that's okay. But you have you swing the terrible towel, you wear your jersey, and you have the Steelers logo everywhere. You're a fan of the Renaissance Festival. You dress like you're a Renaissance person, and nerds. So two Daleks, a TARDIS, and a Doctor Who there. So that's the a group affiliation that you are a member of. Family connections, so wearing all this family wearing the same tartan. I love people who wear uh, the Beisinger family reunion 2020. Woohoo! This time we're doing a keg stand for Aunt Linda. That people get matching T-shirts and then throw them away, so I get to have their T-shirts, which is one of my favorite things ever. Um, the one that is trumps everything is this idea of the state of mind. So this is the decider. If you feel awesome, you're going to dress awesome. Internal, internal motivation versus external circumstances. Often self-image goes counter to practical necessity. We're going to walk from the campus down to the bar in our really nice outfit and our high heels because we look great. Not that practical, especially on the icy streets of De Pere, but we look great, and it fuels our self-image. How one perceives oneself and how one wants to be perceived, and the argument between the two. We dress for who we think we are, not necessarily who we are. So this idea of dress codes, this is a clothing sign system. This varies across cultures and is intertwined with social trends and political movement. These are kind of the rules for dressing, is these dress codes. Dressing for societal reasons is a universal feature of human cultures. Conforming to a dress code indicates membership in a specific group, as we've been talking about. Codes change by context. So, for example, like if you've ever read Vogue magazine or Esquire magazine, they are how do I say this? Shits about what real men should wear. And so how do you dress? So it's a dress code. How do you fit in? If you are going to a restaurant in New York City, a fancy restaurant in New York City, do you wear a Packers jersey? Probably not, because that is not the dress code. That is not societal's context. Society has said you can't wear a certain thing, shouldn't wear a certain thing. So we see deciphering the invitation, so the art of manliness. Like, deciphering the invitation, dressing for the occasion. So black tie optional, semi-formal, business and casual. So what do you wear for each occasion and the rules thereof. We also see, I don't know if you had this in your middle school, high school, again, this idea of codes, rules for dressing. Um, so, what is mandatory and what is unacceptable? Um, and often these sorts of differences are um, are rooted in sexism and racism. That often dress codes are inherently, uh, sometimes inherently sexist and racist. That we don't want girls to wear short things because they're distracting. Well, that's sexist. We don't want men to wear baggy jeans because that can be racist. That can be taken as racist. So anytime there is a dress code, we need to question why it's being enacted, um, because in sometimes it is for good reasons that we want everybody to feel comfortable, and sometimes it's for like, well, everybody has to stop being distracted, and that's when it becomes problematic. So how do we look at clothing? So we look at the visual impact. We want to look at color. We want to look at how it fits on the body. Um, Pattern, texture, fasteners, how it's attached, and adornment, what it's decorated with. We look at the body. So what is the natural shape of the body and the ratio, and how is that changed with padding or corsetry or body modification? We also want to look at how the clothing and the body works together. So, how is the piece of clothing cut? How does it fit? How does it hang off the body, the drape? What does it reveal and conceal? So that's how we're going to frame our language as we look through, as we take a look at clothing throughout history. So the shape of clothing, the first one is just a piece that's wrapped around the body. Doesn't have holes or slits, that is draped, wrapped. It could be pinned, tied, or knotted or belted, but there's no sewing. So some of our earliest clothing in the human record is this, that is just a piece of skin that is wrapped around the body. So a loincloth or a sarong. A sari is another example of this. Togas are a great example of this. Throughout Greek and Roman, we're going to take a look at whole pieces of fabric that have been around for a while. This is a Greek hymation or a Roman toga. No sewing, just draping. Um, so the next one is a flat piece of skin, fur, or cloth with a hole in it, a slit that goes over the head and is draped over the shoulders. So a poncho, a chasuble as well. So this piece of fabric here. So there's no sewing underneath the arms at all, but there's a hole for your head to go through. The next one is a tube. And this is a tubular garment closed at the sides that slips over the head or up the legs, up from the bottom. It may or may not have sleeves. It may also be cut and sewn to shape. So this is a tube. The Roman dalmatica is a tube. A skirt is a tube. A tube top's a tube. This is the next tubular garment that is closed at the sides, that opens all the way, usually down the center front. So a jacket is a tubular garment. It may or may not have sleeves. It also may be cut or sewn to shape. So a kimono, because it has a center opening. A shirt is this type of piece of clothing, a tubular garment. A two-legged bifurcated garment, which are pants or breeches. These pants must be cut and sewn. You cannot just pull up pants over your thing. They have to be cut and sewn. Okay, so that is the end of the slideshow. Um, so we will start tomorrow and talk about prehistory, Mesopotamian, and Egyptian. Please let me know if you have any questions, and have a great day. Take her easy.